emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 052.1K0732, certificate number 23408, the Antarctic Snow Cruiser.
And there's a certain kind of intellectual, upper middle class National Geographic subscriber that at some point in their life finds a way to go to Antarctica on a science cruise of some kind. Have you ever done that?
Can you believe those weirdos?
I know, right? I'm looking at you, Ken Jennings.
I think you know I did.
Tell us about your experience in Antarctica.
I don't think I knew there was this tourism industry now, but I had a friend who was very into it. I guess I knew Alex Trebek had been. He loved his trip to Antarctica. There was probably Clue Crew footage of Alex and the Clue Crew with the penguins.
Alex kind of had the a personality that you can imagine him really interacting well with penguins.
I'm picturing him on the Galapagos Islands right now
with a king penguin,
with a tortoise and some kind of a penguin. Not the emperor, like a
big penguin,
but like a lesser penguin.
Yeah,
a chin strap. If
you
you
could
will.
see that they would have things to talk about.
Absolutely. But of course, Canadians are further from penguins than we are.
Right. Evolutionarily, you mean?
Yeah, evolutionarily. First, we evolved.
And then Canadians.
From penguins, and then Canadians evolved from us.
That's the science I was taught.
That is correct. The second one probably is right. The second one is right. The Canadians were like, look at this earlier offshoot of British people. It's not going well. How could we do that? And they correctly decided what you needed was a little bit of
French
culture, a little bit of cheese curd.
Right. Sort of a Nova Scotian attitude about certain kinds of fish.
Yeah, ruddy cheeks and, general good spirits.
Yeah, blankets. They're big into blankets.
Some of these I'm realizing now are all forced by the weather and not actually by seeing the American experiment.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But yeah, so you can now go to Antarctica fairly easily, just as
easily.
I mean, it's a long boat ride, but it's a middle-class vacation. It's not like, I am the world's greatest explorer. Right. Let me find a freighter that is making a stop on the Antarctic Peninsula. It's a big...
Although every middle-class person I've known that has done it has definitely portrayed themselves as a great explorer.
I'm going to tell you I didn't. I didn't, that's true. And I wasn't, and I'm not. Because there's all these Soviet icebreaker ships that when the USSR collapsed had no real raison d'etre because maybe now Putin wants them back and start patrolling things.
Yeah.
But the ice is all melting, so it's working out.
Yay.
So I think a lot of those ships got repurposed. They're not remotely luxurious.
Were you on a Soviet ship?
Yeah, I was on a repurposed Soviet icebreaker. And, so the cabins are cramped crew cabins.
Right.
And there's common areas that are, have kind of been redressed into libraries and dining rooms and such, but it was a working man's ship, and it shows.
At the time, they had just had barbells made out of cannonballs.
A lot of kettlebells, I think, that had to be removed. But we're much more buoyant now.
Oh, right.
I feel bad for all those Russian Navy guys. Kettlebell's the last thing you want in a shipwreck.
And so, was the food good?
It was all right. I think, don't get me wrong, I bet there are higher end ways to do this. We were at the end of the season, and I was going with a very thrifty friend who had been looking into all the options for years. This is where I found out that there were maybe 3 or 4 of us to a room and that he snored more loudly than I thought a non-cartoon character could.
Oh, no, that's the worst. I mean, you're the type that can deal with that with a certain amount of sanguine. No,
I'm a very delicate little flower when I sleep. I wear like a sleep mask, like a gay-coded character in a 30s Hollywood movie. Like a satiny sleep mask.
Yeah.
And
custom pajamas.
I have earplugs. I have a white noise machine. But there I had nothing. I was just kind of
stocking cap.
Yeah, a stocking cap. I have a candle where the wax is melted onto the plate where I keep it.
And so you're stuck in this tiny Soviet cabin with
and all I have is an iPhone and wired earphones because this is well over a decade ago. So I'm like, what kind of music do I have? Because there's no Wi-Fi, there's no internet. What kind of music do I have that blocks out this wavelength the best?
And it was the long winters.
No, the wispy, whimsical, bittersweet sounds of the long winters are the last things I need with a loud bass snoring.
Well, and I always underestimate your musical taste. So, did you listen to Mastodon? What was the what's the anti-snoring?
Just a lot of industrial rock. Yeah. No, I don't know what it was.
Skinny Puppy.
Primus. I have no idea what I was listening to.
Primus.
I'm just trying to think of something that would drown out snoring.
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know.
Tool.
Something loud. Yeah. Tool, loud. The Prodigy.
Yeah.
But the landscape is phenomenal. Like the passage between, you generally leave from Tierra del Fuego, the passage is often choppy. The Drake Shakes, they often call it, 'cause it's the Drake Passage.
Could you tell just from the air, just from the electricity, the color of the sky? At what point did you feel like you were entering another world?
The color of the ice is the ethereal thing because it is a blue that you would imagine is not possible. It's the blue of the ice they put in urinals.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe that just pure crystalline water could do it. Because here it's not any kind of chemical or even mineral. This is just what Antarctic water freezes like, and ice is not white. It is, when clear enough and abundant enough, it is a
bright
fluorescent blue. And then there's the humpback whale. You feel like a bit of an adventurer because you're on a little Zodiac zipping around ice flows with humpback whales and trying to get to the penguins. But just the stark, it's a very rocky, when they exaggerate vertical elevation on a map so the mountains are impossibly Pandora-y steep.
Yeah.
There are parts of Antarctica that look like that. And it's very dark igneous rock that's really striking against the white snow.
And you can see it. Can you see the mountains of Antarctica from the water?
Yeah, like there are mountains that are near the coast there because
Oh yeah.
You stop at a lot of islands and then you get to the peninsula, kind of that arm that reaches up toward Argentina and Chile. It doesn't really; it stays in the same place.
Did you see the Ross ice shelf? Were you around there?
No. Let's see where. I mean, you do see ice shelves, but the Ross ice shelf is on which side? You don't really see tall walls of ice that much, but it's big. It was great. And just the sense that you're at the end of the world, a place, 99.9% of the people you've met will never see. So there's kind of the back padding part of it as well. But it's good on its own merits. Even if there was just some part of, Labrador that looked like that, you would go in a heartbeat.
What's amazing is that I think people don't realize that there is a 16,000-foot mountain in Antarctica, and then like 4 more that are above 15,000 feet, and then 14,000-foot mountains all the way down. Like it is like the Cascade Mountains and more.
Yeah, I never saw that wall of ice that looks like the cliffs in Princess Bride because that's on the other side.
Gardner,
but there is a big ice shelf. The thing is, like those boats chug, so that even if you have a week to 10 days, which I think is what it kind of is at its shortest point, you really kind of just barely get to the tip of the peninsula and back. You don't circumnavigate Antarctica.
It's a long way.
Yeah, you don't see different parts. You do see a lot of penguins, and they poop a lot. The only non-white part of the landscape is the wherever the penguins are is red or green, depending on what color krill or little shrimps they've been eating.
And is it stinky? Are the penguins stinky?
It just smells like fish.
Yeah.
You know, maybe nobody wants to smell fish that has or has not been through a penguin, but it's not that different than what you'd expect.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's different ways to smell fish for sure.
And the penguins you're not allowed to approach the penguins. They're very, there's real strong environmental protections of Antarctica, which is great. Every time you leave the vessel, you've got to, hose down your boots to make sure no little spore or seed becomes an invasive species on a harsh new continent. And then there's a similar protocol when you come back. They're careful about that. And you're not allowed to approach the penguins. But the thing is, if you sit still, often penguins will approach you.
Are they interested in you, or are they just confused?
Yeah, I mean, it might be because I'm not saying they're nice. They might want to bite off your fingers. I don't know. I don't know what their instinct is like. They don't see people that much.
So they come over.
And
then what happens?
You get a photo, probably, if you've arranged.
You don't sing to them or something? You're not like, hello.
I was just kind of transfixed because I don't know what sound to make. If I want a cat or a dog to come up to me, the culture has taught me sounds for that.
Woof.
What does a penguin want to hear? Hard to say. Primus? We don't know. Yeah, sure. That's what they do. They're songbirds.
That's what birds do. What sound do they make? Squawk?
Yeah, they kind of squawk and whack.
Yeah.
Whack and squawk.
Yeah. Well, I have not. My brother has gone to Antarctica, and I'm not sure of all the next places I want to venture. There are a lot of places in the world I haven't seen, and I'm not sure that's
not on your list.
I mean, it's on the extended list, but like if I were going to go to, say, Kenya or Antarctica, I might pick Kenya first.
I mean, elephants are better than penguins.
Yeah. Well,
this podcast does not sponsor a penguin; it sponsors an elephant.
You make a good point there.
Is it? Do you think you're disincentivized by the fact that it's kind of clearly? I mean, all places are like this now, but it's a cruise basically. It's an industry to show people Antarctica without them actually having to adventure in any way.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I feel like I'm for sure when I watch those videos on Instagram and it's like somebody on a mountain bike is like losing 8,000 feet in elevation by going 60 miles an hour down a course that feels like death is at every turn. And I look at it and I go, wow, that's hairball. But do I have any interest in not just all of the work it takes to do it, which is a tremendous amount of work just to ever find yourself there. You don't want to have that be your first mountain bike ride.
Right.
And you don't want to be on a mountain bike you bought at Walmart. And to get there, that's like really hard. But then to do it, is that the payoff for me? Like for the people that do it, that's the reward. But for me, it just would be if you offered me that or go to New York City and sit at an outdoor restaurant and read the New York Herald Tribune and drink coffee all afternoon, it's such a clear, I would much rather do that than go to anywhere. I mean, and I don't even live in New York. Why if I like it so much, why don't I go there? But it seems better.
It seems like the distinction there is city versus what? Adventure.
Adventure. I mean, I like the outdoors as much as the next person.
But all vacation adventure, I mean, unless you're really like, it's very hard to get across Mali, but I've been talking to some guys. Like, unless you're doing that, all vacation adventure is like, sign this waiver and get in a zip line. It's it's a pretty limited kind of.
I mean, for a while,
rugged individualism.
I really wanted to ride a motorcycle from Helsinki to Cairo. I thought, that you would see pretty much everything everything I don't already feel like I've seen that I want to see. But boy, that's a lot filling up your gas tank. That's a lot of, it would have been like a lot of Ukrainian hotels.
That's not your dream to see.
It kind of is.
How come every course you plot, no matter which direction you're traveling, it just appears to cross all the Slavic countries?
Well, yeah.
You're never like India to Malaysia. That's for me.
Well, I do have a friend that drove across India to Nepal on a Vespa. And that really appealed to me until
That can't be the right bike for that.
Yeah, I watched a lot
Himalayas.
of movies of just roads in India, and I just saw myself on a Vespa in those situations, and I'm like, yeah, maybe when I was 25. But we're coming out of an age of exploration that lasted. What would you say the age of exploration was? I mean, I guess the age of exploration was from the moment the first person in Africa walked across the Sinai and was like, wait, this isn't Africa anymore. I'm over here now.
Do you think they knew?
I'm in Mesopotamia.
You think it was more of an Asian vibe?
Yeah, I feel like they got over there and they were like, this crescent is so fertile.
I almost think it's somebody exploring. I mean, their people always lived in the grasslands, and they were like, what if there's better food in the forest, or vice versa?
Right.
Like they didn't go anywhere. And it ended, I don't know, July 1969, moon landing.
I always feel like
Probably Mount Everest, actually.
Everest. Well, no, because there's all that Siberia that still nobody really knows what's there.
Yeah, but
there's a train across it.
But there's never going to be a headline like, man finally does it, steps on Siberia.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, Everest was, after the South Pole, Everest was the last one, probably.
Everest. Yeah.
And that's why geography kind of declined after that, I think. You know, National Geographic became kind of an old person's thing. It used to be a young person's idea. The world is full of exploration.
Well, and also cultural anthropology fell out of fashion. So it was no longer like, I'm going to go live with the pygmies and see what they do. It was much more like, we need to respect the pygmy
Let's let the pygmies do what they
identity and not go around there. But in the, right before my father was born, there were still many places to go and things to do. People had already been around the world in 80 days on a hot air balloon. But
pretty recently, you
Yeah.
know, that like the world was shrinking fast, but it was in living memory for a lot of people.
that's right. Probably not. Let's see. How old would you'd have to be about 110 to remember a time before, or no, I guess 115.
For airplanes?
Well, yeah, and before like somebody had flown across the Atlantic, and before anyone had reached the North Pole and South Pole. Like those were some of the last. It was no longer enough to just go into the Belgian Congo and get lost. If you wanted to be have your name up there in the pantheon of great explorers,
Literal ends of the earth.
not so much left to do. That's right.
And you know, today there is still Arctic and Antarctic exploration of people who have to just keep inventing newer and more difficult and more arbitrary places to get to.
The first person to ride a unicycle to the South Pole is going to be on that list.
Juggling torches the whole way. I guess we might have talked about this in the Point Nemo entry about, people deciding, okay, this would be a very hard place to get to hypothetically. Let's see if I can get an investigation together. Which British bank will fund this?
Yeah.
I'll do ads. I'll do TV specials.
Mount Vinson, not Vincent, but Vinson
The
on
Antarctic peak.
Antarctica has been climbed by 1,200 people. 1,200 mountain climbers are so tired of climbing the mountains in their neighborhood. They've done all of the big ones, and they're like, what's left?
Do you know why people do that one?
Why?
People are trying to collect the 7 summits. You want to
It's one of the 7 summits?
Well, the 7 summits are not the world's 7 highest points or anything like that. Or
it's the highest point on each
on
continent.
7 continents.
Oh, the 7 summits. And there's only 1,200 people that can claim the 7 summits.
Apparently, unless others have done Antarctic. There's probably fewer, because some of them have done Vincent, but for some reason have yet to do Denali or Everest or whatever.
I wonder if they can all. Well, surely they could all fit into the show box. We could have a meeting of all of the 7 summiters, and it would be in a medium-sized club.
I'm thinking I could do the 1 summit. Because
Which one?
Kilimanjaro, you can walk up.
Yeah, right.
Like
You can drive up.
3
right?
days. Can
Or
you?
I guess walk up, yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's Pikes Peak you can drive up.
Take a Vespa. I'm going to take a Vespa to all the tops of all the 7 summits.
But like 6 of them, I have to carry the Vespa in parts in a backpack.
I think in Australia, it's the highest point in Australia is often not included on the list because New Guinea is very mountainous and has a higher Oceania peak. So I think a lot of people doing that do New Guinea as well. Maybe I could do that one.
Yeah, the one in New Guinea.
Doesn't seem so bad.
But yeah, that's what you say.
Well, there's jungles and whatnot.
But it does feel like if that's an easy one to do, we would know more people that were like, oh yeah, I've summited the highest point in New Guinea.
Do you know Alaskans who have summited Denali?
Yeah, sure.
That's not so bad?
It's really bad.
I thought it was harder than Everest.
It's hard. It's gnarly. You know, I was pretty good. No, let's not say friends, but we had a bush pilot who took us places, Cliff Hudson, and Cliff Hudson was one of the bush pilots that landed routinely on Denali.
Good Alaska name, Cliff Hudson.
Cliff Hudson. And so he was, you know, the way to summit Denali is not like Everest where you go up to this base camp and settle. It's actually to be flown up to some ridge that's you can still fly a little airplane to, and there's your base camp. So very few people, because Denali starts at essentially sea level.
It's insane how when you see these incredibly high mountains, and then you look up and Denali is just rising above them like they're anthills.
It's massive. When you fly around it in an airplane, you feel like, and I've actually said to Cliff Hudson, like, we're getting a little close to the mountain, like easy, you know, like it's scary. Like we're so close. And he's like, we're 50 miles away from the mountain.
This is not
and you're like, it feels like we're about to hit it.
And we're like an Argentine rugby team here.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it's just very large.
No, it fills the windshield, but that's not because it's close.
Wow.
But one of those explorers because just like we talk about a lot, that most of the great scientists of the 18th and 19th centuries also happened to be rich scions of great families who could build laboratories in the conservatory of the house that's on the grounds of the manor house, and sit and do chemistry and draw little model airplanes and so forth. And that was true also of a lot of the great explorers, right? The members of the Explorers Club in the UK.
They weren't hardscrabble kids who,
yeah,
you know, got a lucky break in the Merchant Marine.
Because a lot of it is that those expeditions need to be funded, and in a lot of cases you need a whole ship full of men, and you know, if you're going to go around the world in a balloon, you need a balloon.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's one of the things on the list.
Can't you rent one?
You need 40 sled dogs and a balloon.
40 sled dogs in your balloon.
But yeah, you have to. I mean, before anyone had gone around the world in a balloon, there were not around the world capable balloons being rented. I mean, after it, maybe
There's at least one.
I mean, that's how you make money from it. Then you start an around the world balloon rental.
You have to start out with a Kickstarter.
Yes, that's right.
But my business plan here is that after I finish my trip,
everyone gets a tiny piece of the bastic.
All of you get to try this once.
Well, one of the big names in this late era of great explorers was a man by the name of Richard E. Byrd. And you may have heard of Richard Byrd.
I feel like as a kid, he was the only Arctic explorer I knew, and I'm not sure why.
Admiral Byrd.
Maybe because he had Admiral in his name.
It's a good name.
And he flew over the pole, so it's funny that he's a bird.
Yes, I like it.
And I remember when we moved to Korea, where the winters are very dry and Siberian winds come down from the north, unlike mild Seattle. I remember my dad bought some big kind of comically rugged parka.
Uh-huh.
And
and it had a bird expedition on it or something?
I don't think so, but he just called it his Admiral Byrd coat. My mom would be like, "You wearing your Admiral Byrd coat?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's windy." There are photos of him, and I come to think of it, I bet he never wore it. I bet he wore it like 5 times, but it loomed large in my childhood because that was the only polar explorer I'd ever heard of. Didn't know Amundsen and Scott. To this day, I barely remember which one's Scott and which one's Shackleton.
So Amundsen and Scott...
they were the rivals.
Were the rivals to get to the South Pole?
Yes, and they both did.
They both did.
But what you want, it turns out, what you want is to get back.
You want to get back, and you know they took very different routes, and a lot of these like beat the other guy to the pole type of big adventure are races. Like all of a sudden, it becomes either something that's that's newly possible or something that just strikes the imagination, and several people decide they're going to set off to be the one that conquers it.
And I think sometimes you've got the one guy who does it, and then others think, oh, if I go now, maybe I can beat him. So
Right.
So one person jumpstarts the race,
and often you do. Often it is someone who wins because the other person tripped right before the finish line, or somebody had to delay the start of their thing.
a sick sled dog. The public likes it because there's always, there's teams to watch. The headlines like when we did that T-Clipper race.
Right.
The public loves a good race more than they love a lone adventurer hero.
Well, Byrd actually has sort of one of these. He set off in 1926 to be the first person to fly over the North Pole with his pilot Floyd Bennett. And they came back having flown over the North Pole, only to have their claim sort of disputed.
Like they didn't quite get there?
Yeah.
No GPS then.
Well, no, that's right. And so they were taking like compass readings and azimuth readings, and it was kind of clear to some people that they couldn't have done it. They got close,
Well, but how close is not doing? Like if they didn't do it because they were scared to go further north because the weather was bad, that's one thing. If they had the ability to do it, but their instruments were not precise enough, come on.
For many years, there was the benefit of the doubt that Byrd either got to the North Pole or got really close and just didn't know.
Could have, but
Oopsie,
yeah.
Kind of the sextant gave a different reading. Later on, and by that I mean, in modern times, it was observed that his diary that he kept during the expedition showed some sextant readings that he had erased and then written over them with sextant readings that...
He crossed it out and wrote, definitely the North Pole.
Yes. And so when he reported the final coordinates to the Geographical Society or whatever, they were popping champagne all around him, and he was like, I went to 11, 11, 11. But later researchers said, what's this whole erased stuff that said you were 600 miles from there? And it's an example of, well, if he didn't make it, then the first person to fly over the North Pole was Roald Amundsen.
Oh.
Or Amundsen, who flew over it in an airship.
Oh, yeah.
Norge.
In fact, we did
we
did that entry.
Yeah.
Which would be big news for Norway.
Yeah.
If they beat the Americans to
well,
both poles.
except the whole expedition was funded by an American.
Yeah, but Amundsen's he's a proud
it says son
Scandinavian.
right at the end. But so Byrd really wanted to, and I think at a certain point it's no longer just a rich guy trying to be the first guy to solo fly a balloon around the world. It becomes true of someone that they're driven and motivated to adventure and to test the limits. He wanted desperately to be the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic, and made the mistake of going to the government and saying, here, fund this, it'll be a great boost. Because he'd gone to the Naval Academy. This will be a great boost to the Navy and to the United States to have me fly across the Atlantic. And they were like, no, seems like a waste of time. It was Theodore Roosevelt Jr. at the time,
right,
who controlled the purse strings to that type of adventure. And he was like, nah, I don't see how that pays off.
But he would have beat Lindbergh by years?
Well, I think it was a thing where eventually he was close to going, and Lindbergh went the night before or something like that. And Lindbergh had, in earlier an earlier attempt had wanted to be one of his crew. And the thing got canceled, and then later on he was like, I'm just doing it.
Could have been Lindbergh.
Lindbergh. Aw.
That's like their celebrity couple name.
That'd be a great little stuffed animal.
Got to IKEA and got a Lindbergh.
As we said about the Amundsen and Scott expedition, they both set off, and everyone in the Scott expedition died at some point. Is that right?
Died at some point.
Did no one? Well, at some point. Did no one
We
come
all
back?
die at some point, but yes.
Yeah.
The whole expedition was discovered, I think.
And Amundsen made it back, having conquered the South Pole. But no one had flown over the South Pole, which, as you can imagine at the time, biplane land.
It seems worse, actually. Honestly, if you've been there on land, that's better than flying over someplace. I've flown over a lot of places I'll never go.
Yeah, pretty gnarly, right? An open cockpit biplane, and it's such a long trip, and you would just be...
Were they really open cockpit?
Well, probably, I don't know, 1926? Have I ever seen an airplane that had a closed cockpit in 1926? I can't think of one.
Maybe they would just wear a really big hat.
Leather helmet and a big silk scarf, like some Snoopy goggles.
That'll keep you warm.
Somebody's going to write and say...
You morons.
You
The
morons.
first plexiglass cockpit was...
But in 1928, so this is only 2 years after he flew over the North Pole, or attempted to, he wanted to be the first person to fly over the South Pole. Kind of a much bigger deal. The North Pole is much closer to the nearest airport, let's say. And to get to the South Pole, I mean, to fly over the South Pole, you have to really go to the South Pole and establish a base.
You'd have to leave from an Antarctic base.
Yeah.
And probably pretty close to the pole back then, right? Antarctica is huge.
Well, I mean, they would, in order to build a base anywhere but right on the coast, it's already its own massive adventure just to get.
So you are
the
flying
stuff
from
there.
the coast.
Yeah.
That's a
And
long
so
flight.
in 28, he spearheaded an expedition to Antarctica that involved 2 ships, 3 different airplanes. I guess he had a Ford trimotor, so that would have been an enclosed cockpit airplane. And he was there, he stayed there for the length of several months, kind of doing expedition work. You know, they arrived in November, so that would have been the spring, the Antarctic spring.
I bet he was scared. I bet he was like, okay, tomorrow I'll totally fly it. And then he was like, oh, no, I'll just do some more work around the base.
He had some homies there, and they were probably high-fiving every day and building latrines.
But
And
they're playing a lot of checkers.
playing a lot of checkers.
I'm picturing checkers.
That's right. I mean,
Canned food and checkers.
there might have been a spacecraft that crashed, and the monster was taking
Oh,
over
yeah.
some of the weaker members.
Do you think that delayed the thing? He wasn't sure if he was still human or not?
Maybe he was the last human, but he did eventually on that trip. And they established their base was actually, they called it Little America.
Still there.
A version of it, right?
Oh, is it not the same place?
Well, what happened is the Ross Ice Shelf, which is where America kept trying to sort of, the Antarctica was getting divided up by the major powers
pie
of the time.
Pie slices.
And Australia had claimed a big part of it. The Germans, who had been frustrated all through the 19th century with their lack of colonies that they could exploit in Africa and Asia, the Nazis for sure got down and took a piece of Antarctica and roped it off. So they still really didn't understand like the colonial mentality, even in the 30s.
It's like those maps you see of the U.S. of how much land area voted for, Republicans.
Right.
Like Germany will be like, we'll have all of Antarctica.
Yeah, look at that.
Look at all that
We have
land area.
colonies.
The Reich is huge.
We have colonies.
There we go.
One of the nations that wasn't firmly established down there was the United States. The Russians were there, but the U.S. didn't really have we had not taken our slice of the pie. And America doesn't like that, to not have a slice of the pie.
We were a little more fundamentally opposed to colonialism.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, obviously not purely.
Not purely, but we
like
had
8,000 asterisks.
we had some issues.
But we still had the
with it.
cultural, we were not one of the European powers.
Right.
Like
I mean, we were in the Philippines because they asked us.
Yeah, like Vietnamese communists kind of expected us to intervene on their behalf against the French. You know, that's kind of how ingrained that idea was, that America was not one of these powers.
I mean, so did Castro, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you append communist to the end of the sentence,
That changed all the
it
math.
just makes everybody very uncomfortable.
Was it Teddy Roosevelt Jr. again? Was he like, I'm not going to Antarctica?
I ain't scared of no ghosts. No, it was. This was a successful mission, and they ended up. It ended up that Byrd was the first to fly over the South Pole, and as a result, collected that. First of all, he was the youngest American ever to be named an admiral.
Youngest admiral.
Yeah. Only 41 years old. And if you're in your 40s and listening to the program, don't be scared or shy or sad that you're not an admiral. Be gladdened to know that you can still do some really ill-founded goofball thing, like go be the first to fly over the Antarctic continent.
We've inspired young people to try to become a younger admiral.
That's right.
Young people, become a young admiral challenge. Dude, go on TikTok, become an admiral.
Be the youngest admiral. 41 is the current record.
You've got time.
And he was given at some point along here, he was given a Congressional Medal of Honor, the Medal of Honor for his contributions to science, and the Navy Cross and all these things. And he was a major celebrity by this point. And he did end up, flying across the Atlantic. Like, he was an explorer and a celebrity and a kind of that was a character in American life in the 1920s. Somebody that was maybe, as we've said, still a proto-astronaut. Someone still pushing the bounds of the sea. You know what it is, Ken? It's not Everest. It's the bottom of the ocean. That's the last untracked place.
That is kind of what National Geographic has come to center on as their mysteries of the unexplored.
Yeah.
It's all shipwrecks and trenches now.
Well, and alien bases.
Well, that's because the aliens are down there. Mm-hmm. James Cameron loves
Can confirm
oceans and aliens, and so it's very convenient for him to decide, I bet the aliens are in the oceans.
In 1933, Byrd decides he's going to go back, and this time he's going to lead a big expedition, and he's going to then stay for multiple months. The U.S. is trying to establish a year-round base there as part of their claim, first of all, to not let the Soviets get all the ice, all the global ice, and also to assert ourselves as the big power. And you remember, this is before, you don't remember, but we should remember that this is before World War II, when the world still feels like the major powers are Britain and France, and
the eternal struggle.
To a lesser extent, Europe as a whole, or the big powers of Europe. I mean, Germany's trying to assert itself, and the U.S. is still thought of as, charming, but not quite the United States of the 1960s that stood astride the world. So he goes back in 1933, and, they had established Little America there on the Ross Ice Shelf, but the Ross Ice Shelf is constantly moving. And so Little America had moved down kind of closer to the ocean, and so they established Little America 2, which was up the hill.
Little America.
It was they built a bigger camp, but it was, up the hill from Little America 1, which was headed out to sea.
Only Antarctic base ever to inspire an REM song.
Is that right?
Yeah, Little America on Reckoning is named for the base. It's not about the base, but that's where the name comes from.
That's so REM.
They love the South Pole?
Well, no. They love
the South.
They love us. They do. They love a song that's named after a base on the South Pole, but isn't about a base on the South Pole.
They mythologize the South and the South Pole.
Mm-hmm. Everything from the South to the South Pole.
Very Southern Gothic. It's surprising there's not more REM songs about, like, Guyana.
Yeah, right. Well, it's pretty Gothic in Guyana. Woo!
I guess.
Deep, dark Gothic.
Trinidadian steel drums.
Vibe. You've seen Papillon.
I have.
Yeah.
Did you see the remake?
There's a remake of Papillon?
Yeah, it seems very ill-advised.
Starring who? I mean, it's pretty all-star cast, the first one.
You can't beat Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman unless you have Charlie Hunnam and, wow, this is just a made-for-TV cast.
Yeah.
Eve Hewson.
It sounds like Red Dawn 2.
Oh, Rami Malek as the it looks like as the Dustin Hoffman part.
I guess.
No, that's your made-for-TV Papillon.
Anyway, Byrd goes to the South Pole on his second expedition, and in this case, he actually goes kind of into the continent and establishes a base not at the South Pole, but in the wastes. Most of the crew stays at Little America too. He lives alone for 5 months. Alone, out at his remote outpost doing science.
You think he's doing science, or is this part of his image, like Admiral Byrd told National Geographic that he spent 5 months alone on the continent?
Why not both?
I guess. I would get lonely.
Well, he was lonely. He definitely made a calendar, put it on the wall, and crossed off the days.
Oh, I thought you meant like a sexy calendar, like a pinup calendar.
Like fireman. It's like like kind of a support your local fire by buying this sexy calendar.
I didn't think it was like a sexy beefcake calendar.
Oh.
I thought it would be like a Betty Grable swimsuit kind of a thing.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah, we could have been, sure. But I mean,
or maybe he was into firemen.
I think it was just a crazy calendar on the wall where he was checking off dates because
to not go crazy.
At a certain point, he was in contact with Little America over the shortwave radio. And at a certain point, his messages started to sound kookier and kookier to the point that they were like, that's, he's calling and he's like, Little America base. They're elves. Like, why are these gnomes crawling all over my bed? And they said, we need to figure out what's going on with Byrd. And so they sent then an expedition to find Byrd that was led by Thomas Poulter, who will come into our story. He's in our story. He just came in.
He just came in to help find Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, he was the second in command, and he arrived at Byrd's camp to discover that the stove had been malfunctioning and his camp was full of carbon monoxide. And he was on the verge of death, losing his bananas.
I don't think this humanizes him. I think this actually shows that he is a superhero. Like, he was not going to go crazy from loneliness. He had to be poisoned.
He could have made it.
He totally could have made it.
But so Poulter brings him back, and he is chomping at the bit to get back to the South Pole. And so he plans his third expedition. And what's interesting about this so far is that none of these expeditions have been paid for by the U.S. government. They're down there calling their base Little America. They're trying to establish a foothold. They're planting the American flag.
I always assumed these were government bases.
No, this was all funded by, all these were privately funded expeditions.
Is Byrd still in the Navy?
No.
That's a very long furlough.
He is in the Navy because, as we'll see, during World War II, I guess he's called back up. Well, he was promoted to admiral. So, yeah, he's one of these fancy Navy fellows that doesn't have to go march around the square.
He's been seconded to Antarctica.
Yeah, exactly. Huh. But the government, I think, is like shadow boosting these things. But these aren't official expeditions. But now he's going to lead an official United States expedition to Antarctica to establish a permanent base. And his plan is to drive to the South Pole in a super truck.
In a Buick. A super truck?
In a Buick.
Like a Cybertruck?
Super truck. In a thing not unlike a super Cybertruck.
It's like a Nash. It's like a Nash. Or like what kind of car is it?
Well, it may surprise you to learn, an Antarctic snow. What's the name of this episode?
Cruiser.
An Antarctic snow cruiser.
Yeah, actually, I had been so long I had forgotten. I am not surprised.
So Thomas Poulter had arrived back in the United States, and he had taken over a company called the Chicago Armour Institute of Technology. Not armor, but Armour.
With the extra U, like the hot dog brand?
Like the hot dog brand. And they conspired to build an Antarctic snow cruiser, a giant exploratory vehicle that they were going to drive to the South Pole. It was a vehicle that would have a cabin that would hold 5 people, and it had beds and a kitchen and science facilities. The idea being that at its most extreme,
It could be
that they could live in it for a year.
that's the lab.
For a year.
It's got to be much bigger than I'm picturing.
It's big.
You can't live in. You don't have enough supply. You couldn't keep enough supplies in a pickup truck to support 5 men for a year, right?
It's 15 feet tall.
Okay.
It's 55 feet long. And it has tires that are 10 feet tall
Okay, that's.
and weighs 37 tons.
Can it carry enough fuel?
It can. It has, as part of its fuel load, 2,500 gallons of diesel fuel. And then, even more exciting, on the roof of the Antarctic snow cruiser
Is Mitt Romney's dog?
is a biplane, which has another 1,000 gallons of fuel on the roof in tanks just to fuel the biplane, which is going to be up. It's a Stearman. It's going to be up flying around doing super cool stuff, looking at stuff. And
So that's not just an emergency escape. That's
No.
like we're gonna do reconnoiter from our biplane.
yeah, we're going to do surveys, right? We're going to survey the continent as part of our, first of all, plan to make an American slice. And also, we're asserting our Americanness here. Like, you think you can explore Antarctica? France?
You don't have the Cybertruck.
That's right. And so we're basically gonna drive this truck all around the South Pole.
This is extremely American.
It is.
Like we're behind in this race, but we have a really big truck.
And it is the coolest big truck you ever saw. It looks like, at the time, people said this is a Jules Verne machine, and it truly was.
I'm looking at it now, and it does look like a submersible or a spaceship or something.
Yeah. And it had all kinds of technology that were super advanced for the time. You could raise and lower the suspension so that it could drive across big crevasse.
Right.
What it would do is actually like get across, then lower the suspension in the front and become a sled, and the rear tires would push the front over the crevasse, and then they would raise the suspension on the top tire, put the bottom tire down, and then the back would be a sled.
Well, I guess this was going to be my question. Are big tires really the way to go in Antarctica? Like, isn't the terrain such that you would rather have skis on that thing? Or maybe did like tank treads exist back then?
Tank treads certainly existed.
World War I has happened.
But the idea was that this was going to be a lithe and mobile craft that was going to zoom over the Antarctic ice, not trundle over it like a trundler, but zoom like a zoomer. And this thing had some very cool innovations, and primarily, I mean, one of them was that the diesel engine, it was a diesel electric vehicle, so each wheel was controlled by its own electric motor, like a Tesla. And the diesel electric motor just generating electricity for to power the vehicle. And it also then powered all the electricity that they needed in their living quarters. But the coolant system that kept the engine cool routed the hot coolant around the cabin, keeping it toasty warm. And the 4 tires had independent steering. So the back tires and the front tires, you could steer independently.
Is that why you need 5 guys? Each person steering a different tire. There's 4 steering wheels?
You needed 5 guys to make the hamburgers. But no, it was, and it was pilotable by a single pilot. The other guys would have been scientists.
Playing checkers.
But in fact, one of them had to be an airplane pilot. And I'm sure one of them was a mechanic, because come on, you need a guy. You need a guy who doesn't get eaten by the space monster because he's too canny, he's too savvy because he's a regular working guy, not one of these scientists.
It's not going to be like a heist where they each have a specialty. It's going to be like the Mercury Project where they all do everything.
Right. They're all nuclear engineers.
They're all super Americans.
So the thing is, they thought about this for a long time, but then all of a sudden, it kind of they were given the go ahead. The Chicago's Armour Institute of Technology threw $150,000 into building this thing, but they the thumbs up from the U.S. government kind of came in a like, okay, it's on, and here's your day, like get a move on, because it was 1938, and a lot of stuff's going on. No, I'm sorry, it was 1939.
Oh,
it was October of 1939.
Well, Europe's already at war in October.
That's right. And so, and the war kind of extends to Antarctica because all of the nations at war also had their bases down there, right? England, France, Germany all had, in some cases, neighboring territories. And although it wasn't clear that the war was going to be fought there in any capacity,
I don't know about anybody arming Antarctica.
but it was true that this was a global war, and who knew whether or not the Germans were going to have submarine bases there. I mean, there were a lot of possibilities. So they rushed this vehicle into production and completed it on October 24th, and it was a sensation. Just a fantastically cool thing that seemed like now we're going to go drive this across Antarctica, and they will be sorry that they ever messed with the United Damn States of USA.
It looks kind of contemporary.
It does.
I mean, it doesn't look retro the way you would expect one of these things to look. It almost looks like it could be a monster truck it could be a fire engine from any era, basically.
Yeah, if you saw this driving around an airport with fire hoses
exactly.
on it, it's just like,
You'd
well,
be
that's
they
what
make
that
these
looks
for
like.
this.
Yeah. And so they decided, it was in Chicago, but the boat was leaving for Antarctica from Boston. And so
did they just drive across?
They drove it from Chicago to Boston. And the one of the first problems they realized was that it could only go 30 miles an hour, which was a lot less than they thought, but it was extremely heavy, and these diesel electric motors did not produce the horsepower per wheel.
Boy, those cars
that
behind
they thought.
them must have been on the turnpike. Must have been pissed.
It started a lot of traffic jams. At one point, it slid off the road in Ohio because it was too big for some little bridge, and it was stuck there for 3 days, which was kind of a bad omen. They couldn't get it out because it's too big to tow, and it couldn't get itself out.
This Antarctic exploration vehicle is stuck in Ohio.
Couldn't get through Ohio. And then it arrived in Framingham, Massachusetts, and was both a sensation and also just a big old thing on the roads. And it caused what at the time was the largest traffic jam in history. We've done big traffic jam episode.
Bigger since.
But we didn't talk about the Antarctica snow buggy one in Framingham. 70,000 cars stuck in traffic on November 12th, 1939. Write that down in your 1939 calendars. Anyway, they get it there. They have to kind of dismantle it to put it on the boat, and they sail it to Antarctica. Admiral now Byrd is headed off on this grand adventure, and they arrive in January of 1940, prepared to immediately begin driving to the pole with the team of intrepid scientists.
They still got a few months of summer.
The first thing that happens is they realize that they don't have a good ramp to get it off the boat. And so they build one out of timber, but the thing weighs 37 tons, and as it's getting off the boat, it breaks the ramp, almost falls through it, falls like tips as though to roll. But then because of the four-wheel steering and the can-do American spirit, they get it back, righted, and onto the ice to great cheers, which immediately turn to frowny faces.
When they run over 1,000 penguins.
They run over everyone on the crew, and it's 40 people dead. No, They get on the ice and they realize that the design of the tires was based on Goodyear didn't build a purpose-built tire. Or, I mean, I guess they did, but they didn't design a purpose-built tire.
Just a bigger version of a snow tire?
No, they used tires which had been designed for giant swamp buggies to explore what had, prior to this, been the most inhospitable terrain or the least hospitable terrain. Which do you prefer? Least hospitable or most inhospitable?
I'd rather win most inhospitable.
Okay. So prior to that, like the hardest terrain to surmount in a big truck would have been a swamp. Up and down through terrain and water and blah. But the best tire to get through a swamp is a smooth, treadless.
What, they didn't realize?
They did not.
They had, because they didn't think about snow tires then.
They didn't test it. They didn't have time to test it. They tested it on sand, and they get there, and immediately all four tires start spinning, like completely spinning.
Put on the chains.
And digging down.
Oh my gosh.
Down, down, down. The tires like dig in 3 feet into the snow before they realize, like, okay, cut the motors. Like, let's think about this. They put chains on it. Not really effective. They had 2 spare tires. And so they hooked the 2 spare tires to the outside of the 2 front tires. Now they couldn't really maneuver it the same way.
But it's wider.
But they had double tires up front. And then chains on the rear tires. It kind of worked. But
their speeds are probably cut even more.
well, just, a couple of miles an hour. And then somebody said, well, or they must have just been monkeying around with it. They put it in reverse, and it actually could kind of go in reverse because of something in the way that the machine was weighted, right? It had a certain balance to it. And somehow the way the fuel tanks were situated and the way the tires ran. So they started driving around in reverse. And they actually made a trip that went out 100 miles, a loop, driving the entire way in reverse at about 3 miles an hour.
In reverse?
In reverse.
This is like, there should be a comedy movie about this.
Yes. So the longest, I guess they went 150 kilometers. The longest.
Because the driver is still I'm looking at a cross-section, which is very cool, but the control room is still going to be at the back of the thing. You're facing
That's right.
You're facing the rear of the train now.
That is unfortunately correct. So they end up realizing, like, this is not, we can't really call back to America and say, make us some good tires until next year. And so they parked it and said, it's just going to be an immobile lab. Because it still, in a lot of ways, works fine as a stationary science lab.
I would have left off the axles if it was going to be an immobile lab.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mobile home at this point.
That's right. It's a double wide.
You park it and you put a skirt around it that hides the tires and
hook up the sewer.
And they did like build. They kind of covered it with snow and put the timbers, maybe the timbers from the broken ramp, over it and created a kind of hut over the top of it, with the idea of it being a permanent emplacement. But as you know, in 1940, there was a lot going on in the world, and the U.S. government presciently said, maybe where we're going to put our efforts right now is not getting this moon buggy going on Antarctica again. We're going to cancel this program for a little bit, and then, of course, the war started. After the war, in 1946, the U.S., having, obviously established itself as the greatest country of all time, said, we're going to go back now to Antarctica, perhaps to kick the last Nazi submarines there, like we're going to Indiana Jones the last Nazis that are hiding out in a hut here.
If we can get the right tires from Goodyear.
They get down there and they the thing is still running. It's not still on, but they put some diesel in the tank and they fire it up. It still can go. It still has the bad tires. They didn't bring good tires because they came as part of an enormous post-war effort called Operation High Jump.
Okay.
Which involved 15 ships, including an aircraft carrier, 6 helicopters, 6 flying boats, which were still popular at the time. Can't find one to save your life now. 15 aircraft and 4,000 people, mostly soldiers, to practice parachuting and Arctic conquering, basically.
This is a military expedition, and it's a pretty big one.
It's a big one, and the purpose of it, again, headed by Admiral Byrd, is that he sees the future of global warfare against what at the time was still an unnamed enemy. The future of it was going to take place, at least in part, in Arctic realms.
Because, wink, wink, it's the Russians, right?
It's probably the Russians.
And
but
the closest way between us and them would be over the pole.
But it might be the French and the Nazis fighting over some penguins or some ice. They're going to put peas around a hole and
I just
stick them
think
in the ice hole.
I just think if you're Admiral Byrd, everything looks like an ice war. Just the same way James Cameron is like, my next project will be set deep beneath the waves. Admiral Byrd is going to be like, we need to be ready for Antarctic superiority.
Yes.
Like the next war will be on the ice.
That's right. We have an ice gap.
An ice gap. Kick them in the ice gap.
In 46, they get it running, but it's secondary to, if you think about in 38, they were still using a biplane, and in 46, they probably showed up there with all kinds of hovercrafts and special equipment. This already, although when they opened it up, it still had, they left it with all their
expired sardines.
Yeah, packs of cigarettes on the table and socks drying on a wire.
But they couldn't make room for better tires. I don't get it.
Yeah, they must have thought when they were amping up Operation High Jump, they must have thought, oh, that thing is toast. We're not going to
relic.
But in fact, it still was in good shape. The Chicago Armour Institute of Technology had built a good craft. The next time we really showed up in force in Antarctica was 1956 or 58. That was Operation Deep Freeze. And that was an attempt to actually build U.S. bases on Antarctica at McMurdo Sound and the South Pole itself and the Bay of Whales. We were really establishing, like, we can do this. We're the United States. We can live at the South Pole. How do you like them apples?
Russia.
At that point in time, the buggy was covered by 23 feet of snow. They only found it because someone had the good sense to put a big pole where it was, and they found the top of the pole sticking out and dug down and found it then under the snow. And that was the last time anyone saw it.
So it never moved again?
Never moved again.
Huh.
And by this point in time, we had gone through Little America 3 at Operation High Jump. They built Little America 4 at Operation Deep Freeze. And these were Little Americas that were increasingly up the hill because Little America 1 at a certain point broke off, became an iceberg, floated out to sea, and sank into the South Ocean.
Extremely little.
Little America 2 followed suit, covered with snow, broken off, gone. I think there's a Little America 5 now.
Well, soon that's going to happen to real America, so.
Oh, man. Dark omnibus commentary.
Little America's still open. That's interesting.
But there is the Antarctic snow cruiser buried in an icy tomb. It is suggested that there were a couple of events where big chunks of the Ross ice shelf cleaved off and became enormous icebergs like we saw just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There was one in 87. There was one in the
The last Little America went to sea on an iceberg in 87. Bye.
87. But the buggy is presumed to have floated out to sea, buried under 100 feet of ice, and somewhere in the Southern Ocean,
It's somewhere, it melted away.
probably floated on its big fat tires for a little while. And then
This seems like something somebody should be funding. Richard Branson or James Cameron or something should be looking for the problem is,
where could it be?
it's a very big debris field.
It's like that Indonesian Airlines flight. It could be
Yeah. It's
on
like,
the moon by now.
like there's a full hemisphere pretty much where the snow cruiser could be. Maybe I'll build a replica.
The real kick in the pants here, I'm afraid, is that in 1957 and 58, after Operation Deep Freeze, the Soviets arrive with their Kharkovchenka snow buggy,
This is like their Lada version of a snow cruiser.
built on the frame of a T-54 tank with treads,
See?
with a tank tread.
This is what I've been saying.
Two of them drive all the way across the Antarctic Peninsula,
In an afternoon.
just driving around,
Having the best time.
with 8 people each in them, and ain't no trouble.
Drunk out of their minds.
And those vehicles they made multiples of and continued to use in Antarctica until the 2010s. They probably are still down there, still operational. And at one point, the Americans were like sitting at their South Pole base, super proud of themselves. We live here now. We're the only nation that can keep a South Pole base. And the Soviets like just ride up on them.
Just
like,
doing donuts?
Beep, beep. How's it going? Hey, what are you doing out here? So, as they say, the U.S. spent $10 million developing a pen that can write in space, and the Russians used a pencil.
It does make you wonder who really won the Cold War. Who's doing donuts in Antarctica?
Us or them?
And that concludes the Antarctic Snow Cruiser, entry 052.1K0732, certificate number 23408, in the Omnibus. We are jointly at the Omnibus Project on any social media platform that exists. Probably there isn't one, and if there is, it's not named what it was a few months ago. At Ken Jennings, at John Roderick. Email us your Antarctic experiences to the Omnibus Project at gmail.com.
I bet you there'll be a couple of peeps that are like, yeah, I went.
Was there ever a toy of the Antarctic Snow Cruiser?
It does seem pretty toy-worthy, doesn't it?
It does, but I also don't get the sense that it really made much of a splash back home.
Well, it was a huge splash on its way there. I think that probably...
Embarrassingly.
Yeah, by the time it was marooned, I think people were like talking about the big war and were no longer interested in Antarctic exploration.
I'm looking at the Soviet version, and it's pretty. I've now seen a cross-section of both, and the Soviet one is better.
It's just cool, right? And it's like, it doesn't have four-wheel steering, and it doesn't have...
Ours doesn't appear to have a toilet. I'm a little worried about this.
Oh, it might have just been... I mean, that
Maybe
might have...
they left it off the thing for puritanical 50s reasons.
Maybe. Does the Russian one have a prominent toilet?
It's extremely prominent.
Everyone's
it's on the roof.
Where the biplane should have been.
No, it's between the drying room and the galley. Mm-hmm. I guess you want
That's
it.
where you want it,
maybe
right
you want
by
it
the
further
galley.
from the galley. I don't want to tell the Russians how to live their lives, though. I don't even know if they love their children, too.
I suspect they do.
If you have Antarctic Snow Cruiser memorabilia, please remit without delay to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. Look for your fellow futurelings online. I don't think this is going to catch on like mail trucks, but go there right now. Be the first to speculate about why our snow cruiser had such bad tires. Or
why can't America build a snow cruiser?
Exactly. Or it's possible that if you support the Patreon, You're seeing this 2 days before the masses of humanity down at the Futurelings Facebook page or subreddit.
But don't gloat. Don't gloat.
No, don't gloat. Encourage them to express their generosity the same way you did with a small token show of support. Mm-hmm. And you can do that at patreon.com/omnibus project. We would appreciate it because the show only survives thanks to your help.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. The tires of our civilization may get bogged down in the snow because of thoughtless design, and we may be living already in a CO1-laden, uninhabitable environment. This may be the sound of bird going crazy. We'll never know because nobody's going to come to rescue us.
Which omnibus entries do you think have made our future listeners wonder, is there a carbon monoxide leak in there?
Are they okay? Well, I don't know. All of them? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe just the ones that are by me that always seem to be about vehicles from the 1930s. But if Providence allows, we wish you many goods and cheese and hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.